In March of 1987, a social worker named Patricia Holcomb arrived at a farmhouse in rural Pickens County, South Carolina, responding to what the dispatcher had described as a wellness check. The property sat 3 miles down a collapsed gravel road, bordered by kudzu and rotting fence posts. When she knocked, no one answered. The door, however, was unlocked. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and something sweeter. Something wrong. The living room was filled with medical equipment. IV stands, oxygen tanks, prescription bottles with labels that had been carefully scratched off. In the back bedroom, Holcomb found a girl, no older than 16, lying on a stained mattress. She was heavily pregnant. Her eyes were open, but she didn't speak. Beside her, holding her hand, was a boy who looked identical to her. Same sharp jawline, same pale green eyes, same birthmark beneath the left ear. When Holcomb asked their names, the boy answered for both of them. "We're the Caldwells," he said. "She's my sister, and my wife." The case file that followed, marked sealed, psychological hazard, would remain locked in a state archive for 36 years. It contained photographs that no one was supposed to see, medical records that contradicted the laws of biology, and a family tree that didn't branch. It spiraled inward, collapsing on itself like a black hole. Before we go further, subscribe and comment what state you're watching from. These stories survive only as long as someone remembers to tell them. The Caldwell family had lived on that land since 1843, when Ezekiel Caldwell purchased 140 acres of pine forest along the Saluda River. County records show the property never changed hands. It passed from father to son, generation after generation, in a single unbroken line. But the deeper investigators looked, the stranger that line became. The 1920 census listed the household as Ezekiel Caldwell III, his wife Mary Caldwell, and 6 children. The 1930 census listed Ezekiel III, Mary, and 11 children. But in the 1940 census, something shifted. Mary Caldwell's name appeared twice, once as wife, once as daughter. The children's birth years didn't align. Some were listed as siblings in one decade, then as parent and child in the next. A county clerk named Douglas Fentress, who had worked in the Pickens courthouse since 1952, would later tell investigators that the Caldwell family never came to town. They never attended church. They never enrolled their children in school. "We all knew something was off," Fentress said in a 1988 deposition, "but they paid their taxes on time. And back then, if you didn't cause trouble, people let you be." The trouble, of course, had been happening all along. When social services finally gained access to the property in 1987, they discovered a farmhouse that had been modified over decades into something that resembled a medical facility. The windows were covered with blackout curtains. The kitchen had been converted into a sterile examination room, complete with a surgical table and cabinets filled with veterinary-grade anesthetics. In the attic, they found filing cabinets containing handwritten logs dating back to 1904. The logs were meticulous. Each entry recorded a birth, a pairing, and a result. Elias Nora, brother-sister. Male child, born July 1908. Deformity of spine, lived 11 months. Lillian's son, Caleb, mother-son. Female child, born April 1919, cleft palate, lived 3 days. Ezekiel IV. Ezekiel IV's daughter, Ruth, father, daughter. Twin children, born September 1931, both viable. The logs spanned 8 decades. They detailed unions between siblings, between parents and children, between first cousins who had been raised as husband and wife. And they recorded the outcomes: stillbirths, deformities, children who lived only hours. But every few generations, the logs noted something else: viable. Those children, the ones who survived, were the ones who carried the line forward. Dr. Raymond Oakes, a geneticist brought in by the state, spent 4 months analyzing the material recovered from the Caldwell home. His report, submitted in October 1987, was never made public, but portions of it were leaked to a medical ethics journal in 1991, and the details were incomprehensible. The Caldwell family, according to Oakes, had been practicing selective consanguinity for at least 4 generations, possibly longer. The genetic material recovered from blood samples, hair and tissue showed levels of homozygosity that should have resulted in total sterility or fatal mutations. But instead, the family had adapted. The human genome is not supposed to function this way, Oakes wrote. What we're seeing suggests either an extraordinary series of genetic accidents or something deliberate. The twins that Patricia Holcomb had found in the farmhouse, Elias and Evelyn Caldwell, were the product of a union between their mother and her own father. Their mother had been the product of a brother-sister pairing. The family tree, when fully reconstructed, revealed that every Caldwell born after 1920 was related to every other Caldwell by at least 3 different bloodlines. But the medical records raised an even darker question. Evelyn Caldwell, the pregnant 16-year-old, had been examined by Dr. Oakes at a state hospital in Greenville. The fetus she carried was approximately 7 months developed. DNA testing confirmed that the father was her twin brother, Elias. What Dr. Oakes couldn't explain, what he refused to explain in his report, was how the pregnancy had progressed so normally. According to every known model of genetics, a child conceived between identical twins should not be viable. The genetic overlap is too extreme. The fetus should spontaneously abort or develop with catastrophic defects. Evelyn's child had neither. The ultrasounds showed a perfectly formed infant. 10 fingers, 10 toes, no visible abnormalities. The heartbeat was strong. The growth rate was normal. It was as if the child's DNA had been carefully edited, pruned of errors, reinforced against collapse. When Oakes submitted his findings to the State Ethics Board, his recommendation was unequivocal: terminate the pregnancy immediately and sterilize both twins. The board never responded. Among the items seized from the Caldwell farmhouse were 17 photo albums covering a span of nearly 60 years. The photographs were not typical family portraits. They were clinical, methodical. Each image was labeled with a date, names, and a reference number that corresponded to the breeding logs. One photograph, dated 1934, showed a young woman standing naked in front of a height chart. Her stomach was swollen. Her face was blank. Written on the back, Ruth Caldwell, 4th month, pairing with father approved. Another from 1952 showed 2 children, twins, sitting side by side on a porch. They were perhaps 8 years old, dressed identically, staring into the camera with expressions that seemed too old for their faces. The back of the photo read, Elias Evelyn, Year 3, no abnormalities detected. But the most disturbing images were found in the final album. These photographs were recent, taken according to the timestamps between 1985 and 1987. They showed the interior of the farmhouse, but altered. The walls of the back bedroom had been painted white. Medical charts hung above the bed. Instruments were laid out on metal trays. One photograph showed Evelyn lying on the examination table, her brother standing beside her. They were holding hands. Her belly was round. His expression was calm, almost reverent. On the back, in the same careful handwriting that filled the logs, someone had written, Generation 9. The line continues. When investigators attempted to identify the author of the logs and photographs, they found no clear answer. The handwriting changed slightly over the decades, but the phrasing remained consistent. Whoever had been keeping these records, whether it was one person or several, they believed they were engaged in something sacred. Elias and Evelyn Caldwell were placed in separate state facilities for psychological evaluation. Neither of them ever stood trial. The case was deemed too sensitive, the evidence too disturbing to present in open court. Instead, the state sought a quiet resolution, institutionalization, permanent separation, and a gag order on everyone involved. But during the evaluation period, both twins were interviewed extensively. The transcripts of those interviews, obtained through a Freedom of Information request in 2003, reveal something far stranger than abuse or coercion. Elias Caldwell, when asked why he had impregnated his sister, responded calmly, "Because it was time." When asked what that meant, he elaborated, "Our family has always done this. It's the only way to keep the blood pure. If we marry outside, the line breaks. And if the line breaks, we stop being Caldwells." Evelyn's answers were nearly identical. She showed no signs of distress, no indication that she had been forced. When a psychiatrist asked if she understood that what had happened was illegal, she replied, "It's not illegal to us. It's the only thing that's real." Both twins described their upbringing in meticulous detail. They had been homeschooled by their mother, who had herself been the product of a father-daughter union. They had been taught to read, write, and perform basic medical procedures. They had been told from the time they could understand language that they were different from other people. Special. Chosen. "We were raised to believe that the outside world was sick," Elias said in one session, "that people who mixed their blood with strangers were weak, that the only way to stay strong was to keep everything in the family." When asked about the logs, the photographs, the medical equipment, Elias showed no shame. "Our grandfather started keeping records. He said it was important to know what worked and what didn't. Some babies were born wrong, but some were born perfect. We were born perfect." The psychiatrists assigned to the case struggled to classify what they were seeing. This wasn't psychosis, it wasn't Stockholm Syndrome. It was something closer to a religious belief, a doctrine so deeply ingrained that it had become indistinguishable from identity. On November 12, 1987, Evelyn Caldwell gave birth at a secure medical facility in Columbia, South Carolina. The delivery was attended by a full obstetric team, as well as 2 genetic specialists and a representative from the state's Department of Health and Human Services. The birth was not announced. No record of it exists in public databases. The child was a girl. She weighed 7 pounds 3 ounces. She had no visible deformities. Her APGAR scores were normal. According to the attending physician, Dr. Lillian Greer, the infant was indistinguishable from any healthy newborn. Blood samples were taken immediately. DNA analysis confirmed what everyone already knew. The child's parents were genetically identical twins, and both parents were themselves the product of extreme inbreeding. The child's genome should have been a genetic catastrophe, a patchwork of lethal recessives, immune deficiencies, and developmental failures. Instead, the results showed something that Dr. Greer described in her notes as anomalous stability. The child's DNA exhibits a level of homozygosity that exceeds anything I've seen in the literature, Greer wrote, but rather than collapsing into dysfunction, the genome appears to have adapted. Redundant pathways have been eliminated. Harmful mutations have been suppressed. It's as if the genetic code has been optimized. 3 days after the birth, the infant was removed from Evelyn's care and placed in a confidential foster system. Evelyn was sterilized. Elias was transferred to a long-term psychiatric facility. The case was sealed. Dr. Greer's final note, dated November 20th, 1987, was a single line. "I don't know what we've created, but we need to make sure it never happens again." The Caldwell farmhouse was condemned in 1988. The land was seized by the county and sold at auction. The new owners, a developer from Charlotte, began clearing the property for a subdivision. But within 2 months, the project was abandoned. Workers reported finding things buried in the woods, small graves marked with stones, medical waste, jars filled with unidentifiable organic matter. Local residents began referring to the site as the breeding ground. Teenagers dared each other to walk the property at night. Some claimed they heard crying. Others swore they saw lights in the abandoned farmhouse, even though the electricity had been cut years ago. In 1995, a journalist named Kevin Marsh attempted to write a book about the Caldwell case. He obtained partial copies of the logs, interviewed former social workers, and tracked down distant relatives who had severed ties with the family decades earlier. But before the book could be published, Marsh received a cease and desist order from an unnamed federal agency. The manuscript was never released. Marsh later told friends that he'd been visited by two men in dark suits who informed him that the case involved matters of national security. When he asked what possible national security interest could be tied to an inbred family in rural South Carolina, one of the men replied, "You don't understand what they were trying to do, and you don't want to." The child born to Evelyn Caldwell in 1987 would now be 37 years old. Her identity has never been disclosed. She was never adopted under her birth name. No public record exists of her childhood, her education, or her current whereabouts. But in 2019, a Reddit user claiming to be a geneticist posted an anonymous thread about an unnamed patient they had encountered during a research study. The patient, a woman in her early 30s, had volunteered for a genomic sequencing project. Her DNA, according to the post, was unlike anything we'd ever seen, homozygous to an extreme degree, but with no associated health problems. It's like someone designed her. The thread was deleted within hours. In 2001, a fire destroyed what remained of the Caldwell farmhouse. Arson was suspected, but never proven. During the cleanup, a fireproof lockbox was discovered buried beneath the foundation. Inside was a single leather-bound journal, dated 1986. The journal contained one final entry, written in the same meticulous handwriting that had filled the breeding logs for decades. It was unsigned, but investigators believe it was written by Ezekiel Caldwell V, the twins' grandfather, shortly before his death. The entry read, "We are not monsters. We are architects. For 9 generations, we have done what nature could not. We have purified the blood, eliminated weakness, and created something stronger than what came before. The world calls it sin. We call it survival. Elias and Evelyn are the culmination of our work. Their child will be the proof. She will carry no disease, no flaw, no compromise. She will be what humanity was always meant to become. They will try to stop us. They will call us abominations. But we have already won. The line does not end. It transforms. In 50 years, when the world is sick and dying, they will look for what we built, and they will find her." The journal was sealed as evidence and has not been made public. The case of the Caldwell family was never prosecuted. No one was charged with a crime. The twins were quietly institutionalized, the child was erased from public record, and the logs were locked away in a vault that most people don't even know exists. But the question that haunted Dr. Oakes, Dr. Greer, and every investigator who touched this case remains unanswered. Was the Caldwell family insane, or were they successful? Because the child survived. She was healthy, and according to the one genetic analysis that was ever performed, she was perfect. Somewhere in America, a woman in her mid-30s is living a normal life. She has a job, friends, maybe a family of her own. She doesn't know where she came from. She doesn't know what her bloodline was designed to create. But in a fireproof box, buried in a government archive, there's a journal entry that says she was built to outlast the rest of us. And if the Caldwells were right, if their nightmare experiment actually worked, then the most disturbing part of this story isn't what happened in that farmhouse. It's what might happen next. Because the line doesn't end. It transforms.